Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years. Pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week on the podcast, I have Davy Jones from the Brighton Yoga Festival in the UK. Davy and I got connected through a mutual friend, Theo Wildcroft, and Davy has been speaking out about the British Wheel of Yoga recently. One of the reasons I was so excited to talk to Davy because there is a larger conversation to be had around yoga organizations in general. After all, the US is not the only country where yoga orgs are failing us. As I look at orgs from across the globe, I keep asking people the same question: what should a yoga organization be doing? Davy is probably the first person I've asked that question to who had a clear answer that made me feel like this was a problem that we could collectively solve. He and I talk about a lot of different organizations and their objectives in this podcast, but please pay attention to when Davy mentions the UK Community Outreach Network, which is one of my favorite ideas that I've heard in the yoga space in a long time. Part of why I feel this way is the underground nature of how they're organizing together and sharing info via things like Google Sheets, which, by the way, is also how teens get around their parents checking their text history, if you didn't know. Why that inspires me so much is because they're doing what I wish was more prevalent in our industry. They're sharing generously. So much information is gatekept from those who know or understand how the system works, even a little bit, and those who don't. Often ideas are monetized by folks who have decided that instead of spending time building a model or system that works to sustain people's livelihoods, they decide to gatekeep some helpful information from everyone else and sell it to people who are willing to buy it. Enter Davy Jones, who will share generously in this episode about what he and his community in the UK are up to. Take notes, my friends. Before we get into the conversation, though, will you please do me a favor and like or subscribe to the podcast from wherever you're listening? This feeds the algorithm overlords and lets them know that other people who are like you might want to listen with us. And as you will find out in this episode, community is the absolute coolest thing. So here it is, my conversation with Davy Jones. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so this week we are talking to someone who is going to be my new friend, Davy Jones. Davy, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm based in Brighton in the United Kingdom, which for those who don't know is about 60 miles south of London, right on the south coast. I'm a yoga teacher, although I am of retirement age. I'm actually a yoga teacher and have been for about 16, 17 years now. Came to yoga quite late in my life. I actually teach for my sins a form of a very sort of controversial and untraditional form of Ashtanga yoga, believe it or not. But one that I think is accessible to a lot more people than the traditional hardcore classes are. And I came to yoga quite late in life, and I'm now also, I helped set up an organization called the Brighton Yoga Foundation. Prior to that, we set up an annual Brighton Yoga Festival, which has now been going for 10 years, which is one of the largest yoga festivals in the UK. And the Yoga Foundation, it takes yoga basically to people who would not otherwise have access to it. And that might be defined as people who can't normally afford it, or it might be people who don't think yoga is for them. They look at the images, the Instagram images of yoga, and think, I can't
Yeah.
possibly be like that. So they don't think it's appropriate. So, and they're unaware of the benefits. So we teach in prisons, we teach people recovering from addictions, all the usual people, women recovering from domestic violence, all sorts of things, chair yoga, all types of things. I don't actually teach that because I'm not trained to, but we have trained teachers who are specially trained who can teach that. And we raise money from charities and things like that to fund it. So yeah, and that's been going now for since 2016. So that's been going for 8 years. We've just merged with a larger charity which does similar sorts of things. And I'm also a member of the IWGB Yoga Teachers Trade Union in the UK, which has about 100 members. I think it's the second yoga teachers union in the world. There's one in America, I believe, but I don't know for sure. And I was a member of the British Wheel of Yoga for 20 odd years, but just resigned 2 weeks ago. So that's me.
Oh, there's so much that I want to talk about. Okay. So before I hit record, we were talking about the union. So in the US, Core Power, actually, those teachers who work for one particular brand of yoga unionized together before that brand failed. So we no longer have anybody in unionized positions here in the state. Certainly not a union that would cover all of us because most of us are contract workers versus
Yeah.
employees. Can you tell me how that works in the UK? Because like I'm very excited about the idea we could do that here.
Well, the vast majority of yoga teachers in the UK are self-employed, if you like.
Yep.
They're freelancers. I don't know what you call them in the States, but
Same. Yeah.
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 And so we have far less rights. We don't have the same
Yes.
rights as employed workers. There are some who are on the payroll of different studios, but I'd say the vast majority are freelance. So they are precarious workers. I mean, they're workers who are subject to the whims of, the market and the ups and downs
Yes.
and all the rest of it. And they don't have all of the employment rights, maternity leave, holiday pay, and all that sort of thing that employees have. I mean, there are a lot of yoga teachers in the UK now. I mean, just in Brighton, which is only a city of 300,000 people, which in American terms is tiny, I suspect.
Yeah.
Um, um, Here alone, we've got something like 700 yoga teachers. It's something like
Oh,
one in every 250 adults is a yoga teacher. It's a sort of
holy smokes.
yoga capital of the UK, and so there are lots of yoga teachers. So, but in certainly in where we are, the majority of them aren't working. Majority of them are not even working, or they're certainly not working full time. Very few people are working
Yes.
full time. They're nearly all doing some other job. The This trade union that was set up, it was originally set up about 4 years ago, and for various, we went up to about 150, 180 members, I think, at one point, for lots of complicated reasons that you really don't want to know about. It ended up being put in cold storage until very recently when it's just got going again. And they are like a typical trade union, that they have a legal department who help people who are in disputes. And I'm in dispute at the moment myself with one of the studios I work at. And they also um, they give sort of general advice, solidarity. They can put you in touch with other members who are in other similar studios around the country and all that type of thing. So all the usual sort of things. But it's a very small, agile trade union. It's not one of these huge ones with a massive bureaucracy. I think they've got about
Yeah.
half a dozen people working for it. You know what I mean? It's small. And they've
Yeah.
got branches in lots of other things. So Uber drivers, deliverers, legal assistants, all sorts of people who would not normally fit in a traditional trade union, and they specialize in helping those sorts of people. And they've had lots of success. It's really quite interesting in the courts. They've had successes of proving that people who are freelance are in fact should have an intermediate status which exists in law between being an employee and being freelance, which is called worker status, where you
Mm.
still have the advantages. This is in UK law. I have no idea about the States, but here you still have the advantages of being freelance, but you can get things like sick pay, holiday pay, and all the rest of it if you can prove that in effect the person that that is employing you as a contractor has so much control over how you teach, where you teach, when you teach, and all the rest of it, that you are in effect more of a worker. And some groups of workers in the UK have won that right, um, with which is a massive life-changing thing for lots of them. So yeah, so that's how this union's set up and what we do.
So that's very interesting and exciting to me, partially because so in the States, we're the same way. So we're contract workers or freelancers, like just like Uber drivers or delivery folks. But oftentimes in our law, we are misclassified, right? So I actually own a studio and my teachers are my employees, which they hold more rights than contract workers do in the States. And for the very same reason is because they're like, this is a big issue among studios in the States is that a lot of people are misclassifying their employees and then aren't providing them with the benefits of, like you said, paid leave for vacations and things like that, time off. You know, we have no maternity leave here in the States. We also don't have health care. Healthcare is, I mean, so also I know it's a massive nightmare over here, but a union would be really useful for us to be able to collectively get health care amongst us, because God forbid you ever get sick if you teach yoga.
Yeah, 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 or anything else. If you get sick, full stop in the States, it's a bit of a nightmare.
It's yeah, very true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we're happy to chat to you guys in the States. I mean, seriously, if you want to set up a session specifically, you know, of sharing of learning and so on. The other thing is that, and I have to use my words carefully here. There is, as you know, there've been lots of horrendous sexual abuse scandals in yoga in the last 10,
Yes,
15 years.
yes.
Um, Probably going back much later than that, but exposed in the last 10, 15 years. And the union is very involved in a current campaign to expose another one. And this is likely to come to a head very early next year. And the union has been instrumental in providing all the information the for the police, for the media, and all the rest. I can't go into any other detail, I'm afraid, because it's all completely hush hush. But it's something, another one, and it's one of the most horrendous versions of sexual abuse scandals that I've ever heard of, and I've heard of quite some awful ones. This one is off the scale when it does become, and the union's been involved in that. So it's done some good work, but it's been working on that for 2 years. So it's
Here's my question to you then. You have other organizations that represent yoga workers in the UK. What the devil are they doing in that
a good
situation?
question. There is the largest yoga organization in the UK is called the British Wheel of Yoga. And just from its name, you might guess that it is rather old-fashioned. I would say its general sort of membership over the years has been someone teaching in the local church hall, half a dozen people, you know, during the day. That's the sort of. It's gradually become over the years, although it would say it isn't, but actually, in effect, it's become over the years a yoga teachers organization rather than anyone doing yoga, which I think is wrong. I actually think we need an organization which is open to anybody who does yoga.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I'm not so keen on a specialist separate teachers organization as such. I think teachers are better off linked to the people that they're teaching than just
Ah,
to themselves. But anyway, this organization has been going for a long time, and it is a complicated story, which I won't go through in detail, but they were granted governing body of yoga status by another organization called Sport England. Sport England is a big sort of bureaucratic organization. It's actually quite good organization, surprisingly enough. And it considers yoga to be under the umbrella of sport.
sure,
Now, I know
sure.
many people don't like that in the yoga world, but I tell you what,
Yes.
it's been bloody useful. They've given lots of grants to Brighton Yoga Foundation and other yoga organizations because they know its benefits, and they really do get equalities and diversity and that sort of thing. it's not an organization that just promotes, the elite sports and all that. It's really into
Yeah.
grassroots sport. It's a good organization. And they gave the British Wheel of Yoga this governing body status some years ago. So it has a bit of sort of status above it. But it's actually been, believe it or not, in the last sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, despite the boom in yoga, it's actually been in decline. Its membership has declined. In fact, I was shocked myself when I went through all its annual reports and saw that in the last 3 years alone, it's lost about just over a quarter of its membership. Um,
Oh,
while yoga is booming, it's
yes.
declining. It's also lost money. It's lost something like not far short of £500,000 cumulatively over the last 3 years, and its annual turnover is only £700,000. Um, so it's in decline. Um, and recently, quite a lot of people have left it after it expelled someone who was a very well-known practitioner of yoga community outreach work over
Ah,
some dodgy practices. And when the members of the British Wheel of Yoga, like myself, got a motion to the annual general meeting that this should go to independent mediation, it was passed at the annual general meeting, and the leadership of the British Wheel of Yoga said, "Well, we're not going to do it anyway." So at that point, a number of us left. um, so it's an organisation that I think, sadly, is in a cycle of decline, and its leadership have no idea how to get out of it. Um, they're more interested in settling old scores and factional battles than they are in actually taking it outwards. There are lots of people in the UK who are members of the yoga, sort of in the Yoga Alliance, which I know is big
no.
in other parts of the world, but it doesn't really exist as an organization here, and in any organized way. And people are very critical of it, even people who are members of it. And just to answer your original question on this, the British Wheel of Yoga would never step in to help anyone in a dispute with a studio. They don't see that as their role. They see their role as to spread the wonderful world of yoga, to help teachers get better qualified and all the rest, but they don't see it themselves as a trade union at all. The only people who are around now to actually help people if they get into a dispute is the IWGB Yoga Teachers Union.
So, okay. So yoga teachers are paying membership dues to the British Wheel of Yoga, correct? I'm assuming it's not free, right?
Yeah, it's about, I can't remember, 50, 60 quid a year or something. Yeah.
Okay. So, but then what do they get for their membership dues if the organization isn't going to bat for them as members? Like, do they get discounts on pants or
They
like
get they
what?
get well, they get like a magazine. They get there's a regional local committees. They promote a lot of workshops, some of which I've been to and some of which are okay, some of which are not so okay. And you get cheaper rates for going to those workshops. And it's a bit of kudos, I think. I mean, if you say you're a British Wheel of Yoga member, it's easier to get insurance. It's easier to persuade a club that you're a properly trained teacher. I mean, I did my teacher training with them, and it was good many years ago, but it was good,
Sure.
And whereas a lot of people, the yoga teacher training that happens in the UK, a lot of it is really awful. People go
Yeah.
to Bali for a week and come back with their certificate.
Yes.
I've had some of my students do that over the years, despite me telling them not to do it. And then they come back and they say, "I'm not a teacher, am I?" And I say, "Nope, you're not." So yeah, so they don't bat for you in individual disputes, but they do give you certain discounts and all that. And there's a degree of, you get to see articles by people who on different types of yoga that they do and all that, but it's pretty minimal, really.
So what's the point of them?
That's
I
a
mean,
very
I
good
teach
question.
I teach workshops. I get insurance. You know what I mean? Like so as a worker myself, like I could get potentially all of those things outside being a member of the British Wheel of Yoga, which in the UK has the status of being the biggest
Yeah,
swinger in the club of
yeah,
yoga. What's
yeah.
the point of them? then?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think if it can't turn itself outwards and become a much bigger organization, it's got just under 5,000 members, um,
Okay.
um, which is, but there are, God knows how
Yeah.
many thousands of yoga teachers there are in the UK.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, how many people do yoga in the UK? I mean, it's in the millions, so
Yeah.
it's a tiny organization in that sense. I don't think there is much of a future for it. I don't say that with any, pleasure, actually, because
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
it was the best of a bad bunch in town. But I've decided to put my energies into the yoga teachers trade union instead. Even though it's tiny, I think it has the potential of really, as you say, batting for teachers in a way
Yeah.
that the British Wheel of Yoga hasn't proved able to do so.
So, okay, here is what I think is like I have so much going on that I want to talk about my brain. But the thing that I think that you said that's most interesting is that the British Wheel of Yoga's leadership does not, in your phraseology, like they can't get themselves out of the hole they've dug, right? So we have an organization in the States, the International Association of Yoga Therapists, that actually is probably doing about the same amount of money per year. We're at about they're at $1 million a year. They have
Yeah,
about 5,000 to 6,000 members in their organization as well.
yeah,
So barely
similar.
comparable, right? But yoga's changed since when they started. Yoga has changed in the past 4 years since COVID. And the question is now, what kind of leaders do we need in our organizations to get us to go forward versus spinning our wheels in, grandiosity and, the names of yoga spaces? Like,
Yeah. Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, the forces that are, on yoga now. I mean, and as
mhm,
I understand it, I might be wrong. The States is far more advanced in this than the UK. Is obviously of more and more multiple chains, corporations coming into
yeah,
yoga.
yes,
It's a small thing in the UK, but it's growing quite rapidly. Um, I mean, in London now, a lot of studios are now part of chains. That
yeah,
wasn't the case 5 years ago. Certainly wasn't the case 10 years ago. One of the most famous yoga studios in the UK, one called Tri Yoga, they had two or three
yes,
places in London, really quite high quality places and everything. It's now owned by a hedge fund. You know, the people who set it up
yes,
sold it to a hedge fund. So um, and even like the particular dispute that I'm involved in at the moment, for example, is a club that was independent and has recently been taken over by one of the big brands, David Lloyd. Um,
ah,
it's a £1 billion corporation now, as I understand it. And they want to reduce the pay of yoga teachers and other instructors and everything. And our pay is already crap. um, so
yeah,
so you've got that pressure increasingly because yoga is such a big industry. You've got the commercial sort of forces coming in, who are who are only in. I mean, I know this sounds crude, but it's true. They're only interested in the money. I mean, they literally are not interested
yes,
at all or its benefits, just the money
yes,
because it's a massive market. And so they apply the same techniques as they apply in every other business and industry of the corporations into the yoga world. Um, and also even the independent studios. I mean, I don't know what's the situation, obviously, with yours, but I know quite well the independent studios in this area, and they're all struggling. All of them are struggling. Basically, none of them make money from their yoga classes. Um, some of them have made some money. If they make money at all as a studio, it's because they offer other things like therapists being there, which they rent out rooms to, or they have flotation tanks, that type of
yeah,
thing. Or the other thing that a lot of them have done, which in the short term was a solution, but in the end makes it worse, was they set up expensive yoga teacher training courses and
trainings,
they made their
yes,
money from that. But of course, then they churned out loads and loads of more yoga teachers, which makes the whole
yes,
problem worse for everybody. So,
yes,
so I think these yoga studios will either go under and I don't support this or recommend it, but I just think it's inevitable they'll have to, is they're going to put up their costs. They're going to put up the price of yoga classes. Um,
yeah,
Yoga classes in London now, when I tell people in Brighton how much some of the yoga classes cost in London, I mean they their jaws drop. I mean, there's one yoga studio in London now where an hour drop in is £24. I mean, that's a lot of money. I don't know what it is in the States, but people are used to a few years ago paying a £10, for classes.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I think all the independent yoga studios are going to end up charging really higher rates because they won't be able to afford to keep going. Or so the commercial pressures and the pressures on the yoga studios then leaves a massive gap for the people who can't afford yoga, all the people I talked about earlier, people who can't afford yoga, people
Yeah.
who can't get access to it. And so I think the community yoga outreach, we call it here for better or for worse,
Sure.
that is that is the other sort of wing of yoga, if you like. There's the corporate mega bucks people over here, and then there's us over there. And so
Yeah.
as these pressures get worse and worse, we're going to have to ramp up the amount of community yoga outreach that we do to reach the people who otherwise will be priced out of it.
I actually think so. That's interesting. I'll give you my how much my studio costs in dollars, and I should have looked up the pound versus the dollar. Y'all are usually stronger than us, but we're
I'll look it up while we're talking on my
okay.
phone.
But my drop in at my studio is $25 for a drop in. So, but one thing that I feel like is I feel very strongly about is that as our prices have to go up in order for us to compete, because yes, we do have corporate yoga all over the states, we have
Yeah,
an obligation to build service or community yoga into our business models. Like
yeah,
I do. Like my goal, I use the 80/20 model. So I'm making all of my money in 80% of the people that come through my door, and then 20% of them come for free. And that's me being of service to the community in some way. But there's 1,000 ways that you can do that.
yeah,
But I agree with you because we have to stay in business. The choices that you have to make to stay in business means you raise prices. Then how do we find yoga to be financially accessible to people?
yeah. 25 US dollars is £19 66p,
Okay,
according
so
to 20 quid. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, no, I mean I think that's a great model if you can do it. I applaud that. Well done. Really, that's great if you
It,
can do that.
I
Um,
mean, but it's a lot more marketing. It's a lot more sales. It means that I was a yoga teacher independently for 15 years before I opened my studio, but now I'm way more of a business owner than I am a yoga teacher. And you have to kind of commit to that shift if that's what you're bringing to the table. It would sure be nice if we had organizations who could support us in this journey. I mean, I would, I would think.
yeah.
Um,
Well, funny enough,
what?
I've
Oh,
set
go
up
ahead.
something else as well, which Theo knows about as well. We recently set up, well, we tried to set this up from Brighton Yoga Foundation about 5, 6 years
Yeah,
ago, and then COVID happened and it, knocked it out. So just
yeah,
recently, in the this year, we've tried to relaunch what we've called the UK, that's the United Kingdom, UK Yoga Community Outreach Network.
yeah,
And so it's open to any organization or studio or person that's delivering community yoga outreach and anyone who wants to learn how to do that. So it's a learning
mm,
network. So because what I found was, I mean, it's partly selfish. What I found was I was getting a lot of people ringing me up saying, I hear Brighton Yoga Foundation is doing really good work with this yoga community outreach. How do we do it? And an hour and a half later, I get off the phone. So I thought, well, if we have a network, then people can connect. So we've got
yeah,
over 70 individuals, organizations, or studios in this network. Um, and we've discovered that there's much more of this going on than we knew about. We knew, for example, what we were doing in Brighton. We knew what was happening in Edinburgh, who were actually doing it before we were in Brighton. And the stuff they're doing has been really good over the years. We knew there was a bit going on in Bristol and Oxford, but we didn't know there were these other places all around the country. And now we've got people talking to each other. So it's a sort of place where, and it's all voluntary. We don't charge anyone to be a member of it, and they don't have to be a member if they don't want to. It's totally voluntary. But what they can do is we give them a link to a database, an Excel spreadsheet, which has all the names, addresses, and emails, and
yeah.
who does what. and then they can contact each other. And it's also a place to swap policies. Like, when we started doing our
Yeah.
thing, for example, we realized that we needed a safeguarding policy. And, none of us knew what should be in it. So we
Yeah.
asked Edinburgh Community Yoga, and we said, "Have you got a safeguarding policy?" They said, "Yeah." So we took theirs, crossed out Edinburgh Community Yoga, and put in Brighton Yoga Foundation, added
Yeah.
in a couple of sentences. Why reinvent the wheel? So you can swap policies and things. And the other thing we're doing is we're getting some of the people who want to set it up to interview. This was Theo's idea, to interview people who are doing it already, and out of that to compile a how to do it sort of like little handbook, so
Yes.
that in future someone says, how do I, you say, here's the book. Here's the
Yeah.
little book. And yeah, by all means come back to us with any more questions, but these are the keys. And like, how do you set yourself up? What sort of organization do you set up? Do you set up a charity? I'm sure all the structures are different in the States, but here we have community interest companies. We have all sorts of weird and wonderful things. What structures work? What sort of policies do I need? What sort of teaching qualifications do I need? How do I raise funds? All those sort of questions. We try to have some generic answers, for
Yeah.
people. Um, and so, yeah, we've got this network, and it's met 3 times now on Zoom, because obviously I know in the States you're used to 100-mile journeys, top of a hat. But in the UK, 50 miles is considered to be a long journey. And so having people up in north of Scotland and down on the south coast of England, people, it's got to be a Zoom thing. So we had 3 Zoom meetings. We're just about trying to arrange the 4th for January. Um, and so that's, I mean, and maybe, I don't know, maybe you and Giovanna, accessible yoga, and other people could set up a similar network in the States. I don't know if that would be useful or not. I mean, maybe you don't need to. Maybe Giovanna's network already does that. I don't know, but
I mean, that's such a great idea, partially because, I mean, so I'm in spaces where studio owners are doing some similar things, but it's very difficult in 2024 capitalistic culture to be in a space where somebody's not trying to monetize that,
yeah,
because that's like always what happens is somebody says, "Hey, how are you doing this?" And somebody else says, "I'll tell you, but you got to give me $50 or whatever else." And I love that it's like that feels so very organic and grassroots, like community organizing
yeah,
is really cool.
yeah. No, and we did say to people, look, if you're worried about, because like on the funding thing, for example, everyone's chasing the same funding. So
Yeah.
I was worried that people wouldn't want to give information about where you could get
Yeah.
funding. But actually, I can't speak for all of them, but so far, most of the people have been quite open about where they get their funding from, and not trying to, as you say, sort of keep it just for themselves. It's quite,
Yeah.
I think the people who've been drawn to it are the good guys, you know,
Yeah.
us, the good people who really are into it because of the love of yoga and what it can
Yeah.
do for people, and not out to make a. I mean, we could sell this how-to brochure, but I'm not going to let anyone try and do that. We'll produce it, and it'll just be free of charge to people.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just okay to be of service because you want to make the world a better place, right?
Yeah, and all of us have benefited from it. I mean, I think for me, I started doing yoga as a middle-aged man,
Yeah.
feeling very unfit and all the rest of it, midlife crisis, classic and all that. And you just suddenly you realize just what it's given you, yoga, and you
Yeah.
think, I've got to help other people get this. And for me, it's just axiomatic, that's what you do is you help other people, and it's you know just helping other people in networking. You get the responses back anyway. Eventually, I found it even when I was doing more straightforward work, before I became a yoga teacher. In it was in public service, admittedly, but there I sometimes used to get told off for doing too much networking, and I'd always say to my boss, this is so short-sighted. If I help this other organization now, in a year's time, there'll be something they can help me, and that's just,
Yeah.
I think that's the way it works. That's the way how sensible think people work.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. I don't think anybody in the States has ever been told off for doing too much networking. We all love that stuff over here.
Oh
We
no, it
we
was
love a good
considered. No,
connection.
I was literally told off once. I mean, not in a bad way, but it was my boss. It was a good guy. It was a nice guy, but he said to me, "You spend a hell of a lot of time networking," and I said, "I get a hell of a lot back from it." Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's one difference we have then.
Okay, so first of all, I would love to be a fly on the wall just to hear how y'all are organizing in your like community network. That's really cool.
But do you want to come to the next meeting?
Yes, I
Um,
1000% want to come to the next meeting.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, we tend to have it. It's anything with yoga teachers is impossible to find a time, isn't it? Because people are
Yes.
teaching every other day, so
Yeah.
you spend ages trying to find time. uh, I think sort of early evening on a Friday, 5 o'clock our time, about 1 o'clock your
Yeah.
time, is the sort of time when people just finish work for the week and they don't mind maybe
Yeah.
for an hour getting together, or a weekend. Those are the
Yeah.
times, probably on a Sunday. I think those are the
Yeah.
two times I've seen the best to try to get the most people. But yeah, I'm happy to add you as an honorary
Please
member.
do. I
Yeah,
just I just want to see how it works because that seems so cool.
yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this question because we've talked about organizations, we've talked about how you're doing grassroots organizing in the UK, which is just so cool. What is the organization? And this, I'm just going to reference Theo Wildcroft here because she put this in my brain and it's such a good question. What is the organization that yoga teachers deserve? What does it do
Well,
for us? What do we do for other people?
I think I think for yoga teachers, I think a yoga teachers trade union is what we need for teachers.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
because I think in any other profession, if you were a social worker, you'd be in a social workers trade union. If
Yes.
you were an auto worker, you'd be in an auto workers trade union, and that would hopefully, I mean, I know they get bureaucratized and all that, and corrupt sometimes, but you'd hope that they would be the people who would support you. So I think you need a yoga teachers trade union for teachers. But I'm more interested in the idea of having an organization for people who do yoga. You know,
Ooh, say more.
well, I don't know. I wish I had all the answers, but I don't. I mean, I just think somewhere where you could go. Maybe it isn't even a big bureaucratic organization. Maybe it's a website, or maybe it's a very fluid thing. Something that people who do yoga anywhere would know it exists, and they would know they could go there to get information about yoga, to get information about if they wanted to become a teacher, fine, different they it would all be very broad in its taste. It wouldn't take sides on things or anything like that. It wouldn't actually be it would be something that someone, because at the moment it feels to me like there's a gap. I don't know whether it's like that in the States, but here there's a gap between um, people start doing yoga, and after 6 months to a year, they think, I really like this. I'm getting a lot of benefit of this. I'd love to find out more. And there's nowhere for them to go. They have to do
Yes.
teacher training. So they end up with more teachers, most of whom then don't teach. So I think
Yes.
the gap in the market is something for people who want to know more about yoga. And they can join it and they can find all the information, all the rest of it. Now, I don't know how you set this up. I certainly don't think I've got the time or the energy to do it,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't mind being part of a collaborative project to do so with other people. But that's what I
Yes.
think is missing. Um, so I think there's two different. We need something for people who are interested in yoga, full stop, and something to organize and defend yoga teachers.
So I'm going to tell you what I do at my studio to address the gap that you have talked about. So we run what's called a studentship course, and it is not a teacher training. In fact, I ran studentship well before I ever trained yoga teachers. I've always said I didn't want to train, and then
Yeah,
a few people drug me in that direction, but
yeah,
it's not where I feel called to go. But we've built essentially around the studio exactly what you've said, this course,
great.
this program that allows students to just come and learn more about yoga. To answer the question, like, when you go into your yoga class and you look at your teacher and you're like, something I don't know, what is that?
Yeah,
That and So that was the question we wanted to answer because I agree, like there needs to be more than group yoga classes. And then we funnel everybody into these super expensive trainings, but we don't have work for those people. And we all know we're poor as we teach anyway.
Yeah.
Like you're 100% correct that there is room for that sort of middle space.
Yeah. I mean, there is a little bit of that in the UK, but I mean, you have to really dig around to find it, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and so, I mean, I teach up at one of the universities, Sussex University, and I've been teaching there for 10 years now. It's really good fun because I love working with younger people because it's just a
Yeah.
different energy, you know.
Same.
And so, I mean, I do a regular class there, and I said to them about a month ago, would you like just like a little workshop where I'll talk more about yoga generally? We'll do some posture stuff as well because that's what they're
Yeah.
used to. But we'll talk about the history of yoga, a little bit about the philosophy of yoga and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
And so I did it yesterday, and they lapped it up, and they absolutely loved it. Because one or two of them actually are thinking about becoming teachers. A couple of them actually are teachers already, even though they're students. And yeah, that sort of thing is I think is what we need. Um, I mean, I suppose the other issue is you've got in the States. I mean, you've got Yoga Journal, haven't you?
Yes,
Um,
they're an online publication only, though. They don't
oh, are
publish
they
an
net
actual.
online only? Oh, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, right, for example, I found their stuff over the years on injuries and things like that very useful. If
Sure.
someone comes to my class and says, I've got X complaint, I usually look at them quizzically and think, and I say to them, do you know what? I've never heard of that one.
Hold on, let me Google that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's exactly what I do. And the first place I go
Yeah.
usually is the Yoga Journal to see because they've usually got an article on it, and usually it's quite good, and
Yeah.
references are. So I suppose you may have got that, and I suppose we can access that. So that partially addresses the need. But I think some sort of overarching thing for anybody
I
who's into yoga
agree.
would be a really valuable thing to create. But it sounds like a big job to me.
It does. It sounds like a job I don't necessarily want, but we can just put that into the world to
Yeah.
see if somebody's willing to create a collective database for everybody. What I think is interesting, and somebody else referenced this on my podcast a while ago. Actually, it was Leslie Kaminoff, and he talked about essentially Yelp reviews for yoga teachers. And I find it to be an interesting idea in that way because in the States, right, as you've referenced, we have so much space here. And the joke has always been you could come into my town, which is 450,000 people, and you could teach yoga and you could behave poorly. You could hurt people or worse. And then
Yeah.
you could just lift up and move an hour away and do it again in a different town, and no one would ever know because there's no way to follow people or teachers, and there's no way for us to have our students give feedback about us in any way, which can be dangerous, as we've referenced a couple times. Like there are bad actors in
Yeah.
our spaces. And don't you think our org should be following that too?
Yeah, no, I agree. I hadn't really thought. I mean, I sent an email to all my students who came to my workshop yesterday to say, please give me feedback. But
Yeah,
but there's no
yeah,
structured way to do that at the moment. As you say, there's no central database that you can check.
yeah, yeah. Actually, somebody suggested building an algorithm so that AI could take a bunch of the data work out of it, that people could come and feed in to an algorithm, and the algorithm would flag reviews and things based on like the words that we say. And I was like, well, if AI's here, that's a way, I guess that's a way to use it for us.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I hadn't thought of that before. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I
Go for
how yeah, right.
it.
So how do you see organizations in the future? So you've got a yoga union in the
Mm.
UK. Let me ask you this, a hard question. How could the British Wheel of Yoga save themselves? Is it possible?
Mm. I think they could only save themselves if they decided to become an organization for yoga as a whole. They're, I mean, they're very organized. I mean, even their structures, their sort of leading bodies are dominated by training people, by the people who run their
Yes.
training.
Yes.
And so the reason why I think it's going to be very difficult to change them is because if you put a proposal to that body of people where the training people have a majority to
Yeah.
say we shouldn't just be a training organization, I wonder which way they're going to vote. So
Right.
it's turkeys voted for Christmas and all that, as they say in the UK. So I mean, I just, that's why I don't think that they will. But that's the only way they could do that, and they would have to sort of drag themselves into the 21st century. I mean, I feel like, they've been very slow and weak on diversity issues. I have to say, in the last 3 or 4 years, they've got a lot better. But they were it was a very white organization, British Wheel of Yoga, for a long, long time. I mean, you rarely ever saw a black face in any of the pictures in their magazines or any of the people leading the organization or anything. And to be honest, that does reflect the yoga community here, which is overwhelmingly white. But
Yes.
even so, it was their responsibility to break out of that, and they've only just begun to address that in the last few years. Um, and so, I think they'd have to break out of that sort of old-fashioned thing of being just representing the local teacher who's teaching in a church hall around the corner, 5 classes a week or something, and
Mm.
become an organization that was relevant to people working in studios, to people who are going to yoga classes and want to find out more about it and all the rest of it. And I just don't think they're going to do that. So that's why I
How
don't put any effort into it anymore.
how do they decide who's in charge at the British Whale? Is it just internal
They have an annual
decisions?
general, yeah, they have votes every 2 years, but a lot of, I mean, it's sort of self-perpetuating in the sense of a lot of the good people have left it because, and therefore there's less people to vote for change.
Yeah.
It's in a decline anyway, and
Yeah.
I can't see it really breaking out of it. I mean, I think it will still be there. I think it'll, um, but I mean, one of the things that I find odd is, they have this governing body status, but really most yoga teachers in the UK don't recognise that. Do you know what I mean? They might
Yes.
have it, but most yoga teachers here say, "Well, who the hell are they? Well, how do they get this? I'm not a
Yeah.
member." And so there's actually quite a lot of resentment towards the fact they've got it, and it's also very unclear, how they get rid of it. I mean, it appears if the Sport England people, although I say generally I think they're quite good, they seem to have a very sort of laid back attitude once they've granted this national governing body status to organisations. The organisation's got to do something really catastrophic before they'll take away that governing body status. Do you know what I mean? So there's
Yes.
no real accountability uh,
Yeah.
of this organisation, and so in a way, I mean, I looked into it a bit, and the only two bases on which they're prepared to sort of review the governing body. So I looked into it for the purposes of this podcast. Is
Yeah.
is one is if the organisation isn't adhering to the terms of the grant that it's received. Well, the British Wheelie Yoga hasn't had a grant from Sport England for 15 years, so that's not an issue. And the only other one,
Uh,
mind you, that in itself tells you something that they haven't had a
yes.
grant from Sport England for 15 years. But anyway, the second one is if they're clearly not meeting the criteria of being a governing body, and that any complaint raised against them has gone through all the different channels inside that organization. But it's not clear what these criteria are. And so I've written to Sport England just in the last few weeks to ask
Yes.
what are the criteria? I can't see them anywhere on a website. So
Yeah.
there's no accountability. And when an organization doesn't carry out its vote of its members at its annual general meeting, there's no accountability there either. So it feels like a lot of people see them as a self-appointed, um, you know, um, and that's
Yes.
maybe a little unfair, but that's the general view. I mean, there are far more yoga teachers not in any yoga organization at all than there are people in all the ones like Yoga Alliance, Yoga Trade Union, British Wheel of Yoga put together. Far more,
Yeah.
probably everybody who's in one of those. There's probably five that aren't in any.
Do you think that's a reflection of us? I often say yoga like came of age sort of in the counterculture movement of the 90s, right? Was when we got really popular. And especially in the States, we tend to have a lot of our roots like really deeply in like when Madonna discovered yoga in like the 90s and we were all in
Yeah.
back rooms. Like and so sometimes I'm like, are we just stuck in the 90s? Like we'll never organize because we are anti-establishment?
Yeah. Funnily enough, I had a student come to one of my classes once who said, I've come to this class because I want to look like Madonna. I said, come in. I
There you go.
don't care the motivation. I don't care what motivates them
Sure.
to come.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
that's what their motivation is. No, but yeah, well, I think the trouble is, I mean, I've been a lifelong trade unionist, you know,
Yeah.
so, and I'm political activist. I was politically active 50 years ago, so to me, all this comes naturally. But for
Same.
a lot of yoga people are very different. That they might be quite liberal in some respects, but they're very almost like anti-organization. I mean, a lot of people in the
Yes.
yoga, a lot of people in yoga here are against regulation of the yoga industry. They think it's the wrong
Same.
thing. Whereas if you start doing any yoga community outreach, you have to show that you're a regulated organization or you've got standards.
Yes.
I mean, I did a workshop with a bunch of doctors in the UK a few years ago and did a little funny yoga class with them. A lot of them all knew about yoga already. And then I told them about the work of the Brighton Yoga Foundation. And the first question they asked was, and he didn't ask it quite as aggressively as it sounds now, but the first question the teacher, one of these doctors asked was, how do I know that your teachers aren't going to injure my patients?
Mm.
And I thought, we can't do this yoga community outreach unless we address that problem. But
Yes.
I would say probably the majority view amongst yoga teachers in the UK is they don't want regulation. They think some people think it's too spiritual to be regulated. Some people think it means that someone's going to tell them what they can put in their yoga classes and what they can't. Other
Yes.
people, it's just they're anti-establishment, as you say, and anti-authoritarian and all that, and they think it's all Big Brother. But it's madness. I mean, everything else is regulated. I mean, I know Elon Musk wants to get rid of all regulation everywhere, but I mean,
Yes.
every other profession, therapy and things like that, are usually, certainly in the UK, are regulated.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and I think yoga needs to be as well. It has to be.
I think we have to take ourselves seriously enough to say that what we offer is of enough quality that we can stand up to regulation and we will be okay. Like we do good work.
It's a good way to put it, actually. I like that way of putting it, how you put it,
Yeah.
that we're good enough and strong enough to withstand it. I think is a good way to explain it to people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have sort of a confidence issue as an industry, right? And we like I understand we've come up in weird circumstances. Like we've come up as a profession in ways that other professionals have not come up, right? We've sort of
Mm,
fit into the cracks and crevices of the culture. But what
mm.
we do has value. I mean, what we offer people has value. We'll be okay. We'll be able to stand up to regulation.
Yeah. I mean, when I started doing yoga 25 years ago, I mean, there were very few medical studies showing the benefits of yoga.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now, I mean, you could fill the room you're in from floor to ceiling with all the
Yes.
reports on the
Yes.
medical benefits of yoga. And that's in
Yeah.
just in 25 years. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so we can demonstrate the benefits. We can then demonstrate the medical benefits, psychological benefits. I mean, I know not every one of those reports meets the standards of, the highest standards of how you do these medical reports, where you have to have
Right.
blind trials and all this type of stuff. But I mean, they're sufficiently strong, the reports now, that we can show the benefits.
Yeah.
And it's important we do. I mean, because there's a public health crisis everywhere in the world at the moment,
Yes.
and we are part of the solution. We are part of the solution of the public
Yep.
health. Um,
Yeah.
and also because of the cost of all the health related stuff, we're part of that solution as well. We're much cheaper than
No.
on the preventative side than someone having a serious problem afterwards. I mean, it's quite funny, in the UK, football is a big thing over here. English football,
Yes.
not American football.
Yes. I know what
Um,
you mean.
and every Premiership football team, that's the top football team, everyone now has a yoga teacher.
Yes.
Every single one. Why? Because if one of their players um, breaks their hamstring or has a hamstring injury,
Yeah.
they're on £50,000 a week. They're out for 3 to 4 weeks. It's a lot cheaper to have a yoga teacher.
Yes.
And from the point of view of prevention, and it's also, to carry on with the footballing analogy, I recently saw something which was extremely interesting. The two players in the English Football Premiership League who've played the most matches ever, like it's sort of like 800 matches or something, which is a lot because you
Yeah.
pay 50 a year. So that's a lot of matches over a long period of time. The two players with the highest number both did yoga.
Ah.
Both of them. One of them is really well known, a guy called Ryan Giggs, who was a Manchester United player, was a household name almost, did yoga, and so did the other one. That's why their career lasted longer.
Yeah.
So we've got the evidence. We're part of the solution of the crisis of public health, I think.
Davy Jones, that's the perfect place to stop. Tell everybody where to find you if they want to learn from you.
Right, okay. All right. Oh, blimey. You should have forewarned me. Okay. My personal website with my wife, who's also a yoga teacher, is www.inspirationyoga.net. Inspiration Yoga, all one word.
Okay.
Brighton Yoga Foundation, you can just probably put it into Google and find it. We recently merged, actually, which is a bit of a complication, with another organization called the Brighton Natural Health Foundation. But you can find Brighton Yoga Foundation or Brighton Natural Health Foundation quite easily through search engines. Don't use Google, use something else. But you can find us okay. And and the yoga community, UK-wide yoga community outreach network, hasn't got a website, can't afford it. We're trying to raise some money to buy, to fund a coordinator part-time or something, but we haven't managed that yet. So, but you're invited.
That's the best. Thank you so much for having this conversation. It was delightful.
Thank you. No, I enjoyed it. It's good. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, we're very interested in what's happening in the States, actually. And it's good to have a contact person who's on the same wavelength that we can talk to about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation, Davy. Here are our key takeaways. And full disclosure, friends, there are more key takeaways here than I have ever written before, so buckle up. First, I would just really love to mention that the UK has a labor union for yoga professionals. This is a thing that happens around the world, and I'm excited to explore this conversation more in coming months. Next, in spite of many objections by so many, I mean really so many people that I've talked to in the yoga space, a union actually could help yoga professionals in North America. The union could do for us what it does for UK workers, provide advocacy, health insurance, support, and accountability for the profession of yoga. Collectively, we are better together, and unions can be part of the solution. Next, ever since I started getting involved with advocacy work in regards to the IYT, or International Association of Yoga Therapists, people keep asking me some variation of the same question. Are you starting an organization? But this begs the question I asked Davy about the British Wheel of Yoga. What's the point of an organization? We have a lot of orgs that claim to be doing good work in the field, but very few can come to the table with receipts. The British Wheel of Yoga is just one of many in this regard. Next, building community and service into our business models is so crucial for aligning our businesses with yogic principles. It's inevitable that we will need to price our services in such a way that we make enough money to keep our doors open, but unpacking the question of how we give back is key to going forward in an industry with integrity and respect for the tradition and practice of yoga. Next, the UK Community Outreach Network is the coolest idea I have heard in a long time. Honestly, can I interview everyone who is involved in this so we can tell the world how it works? Like, pretty please? Does anyone in the States want to work on this project with me? Next, let's chat about an organization that keeps our students safe, and that's their entire goal. What does that look like? How can we, as yoga professionals, support this sort of organization? Next, I don't know how many times I've referenced Brood on this program, which is something that I do in my studio. It's a studentship course. But please, go ahead and steal my idea. Studentship courses can offer people a deeper understanding of yoga and yogic principles without actually needing to train people to be yoga teachers. Next, what do we feel about regulation in our industry? I do truly believe that we are good enough and we are doing good enough work to stand up overall to regulation as an industry. Does that mean licensing? I don't know. But we certainly can stand up to general oversight as an industry. I know we can. And finally, we are part of the solution of the crisis of public health. Davy could not have said that better. When you're feeling down about your profession, my friends, please remember that. Next week on the podcast, I have Jeevana Heyman back on. I have to say, I am so grateful that he came on the podcast last year during my perfectionism series, and then we got to reconnect again this year talking about one of both of our favorite topics, yoga organizations. Jeevana is the anchor of this podcast series on yoga orgs, and I know you are going to love our chat. Until then, friends, let's go get to work, and I'll catch you around the water cooler next time.